There's a moment, a single, careless moment, when everything changes. Bruce Lee stood in the center of that Hollywood dojo, sweat glistening under fluorescent lights, his reputation towering around him like an invisible fortress. He'd built something untouchable, a legend carved from speed, philosophy, and 1,000 victories no one dared question. So when Chuck Norris walked through those doors, quiet, unassuming, with calloused hands and worn shoes, Bruce did something he'd rarely done before. He laughed. Not a chuckle of acknowledgement or friendly greeting, but a laugh edged with dismissal, the kind that cuts deeper than any punch. Chuck said nothing. He simply bowed, that slight dip of respect Bruce barely returned. And in that silence, in the space between arrogance and humility, a confrontation began that would strip away everything Bruce thought he knew about strength. Because sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who roars. It's the one who smiles back and waits. This is the story of how Bruce Lee learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Hollywood, 1972. The Golden Dragon Martial Arts Academy sat wedged between a record store and a failing Chinese restaurant on Sunset Boulevard. Inside, the air smelled of liniment oil, worn leather, and ambition. Bruce Lee owned that space in every sense of the word. Not just the lease but the atmosphere, the energy, the very oxygen his students breathed. When he moved, they watched. When he spoke, they memorized. When he demonstrated a technique, they understood they were witnessing something beyond mere martial arts. They were seeing philosophy made flesh. Bruce had earned this. Every sleepless night studying Wing Chun under Yip Man in Hong Kong. Every humiliating audition in Hollywood where casting directors saw his face and immediately typed him as houseboy or villain. Every broken promise from producers who wanted kung fu but didn't want a Chinese man teaching it. He'd fought through all of it, not with bitterness but with an almost spiritual determination to prove that martial arts, real martial arts, belonged to those who understood its depth, not just its showmanship. That afternoon, Bruce was teaching a small group of advanced students. His movements were water and lightning simultaneously, a punch that seemed lazy until the impact echoed through the heavy bag like a gunshot, a kick that defied physics, his body horizontal in the air, returning to stance as if gravity were merely a suggestion. His students, actors, stuntmen, true believers, watched with reverence bordering on worship. Martial arts is not about fighting, Bruce said, his accent still carrying traces of Cantonese despite years in America. It's about becoming. You don't learn to punch. You become the punch. You don't learn to kick. You become the kick. He demonstrated with a side kick that whistled through the air, stopping inches from a student's face. The young man didn't flinch. He knew Bruce's control was absolute. Bruce felt good. Better than good. He felt validated. Enter the Dragon was in pre-production. Hollywood was finally taking him seriously. His philosophy, be water, my friend, was spreading beyond the dojo, becoming part of the cultural conversation. He transcended being just another martial artist. He was becoming an icon. That's when the door opened. Chuck Norris entered without fanfare. No entourage, no announcement, just a man in a simple white GI, slightly faded from too many washes, the belt tied with the kind of precision that spoke of discipline rather than pride. He was bigger than Bruce, broader through the shoulders, with a Midwestern plainness to his features that seemed almost out of place in Hollywood's manufactured glamour. His hair was reddish-brown, military short, and his eyes carried a quietness that some mistook for slowness. Bruce's students stopped moving. They recognized Chuck. He'd been making a name in tournament circuits, had some small roles in television. But he wasn't Bruce Lee. Nobody was Bruce Lee. Can I help you? Bruce's tone was pleasant enough, but there was a measuring quality to it, the way a king might address an unexpected visitor to his throne room. Chuck bowed, a full bow, the kind that required vulnerability that exposed the back of the neck. Mr. Lee, I'm Chuck Norris. I was hoping I might train here, learn from you. I followed your work, your philosophy. I believe I could grow under your instruction. Bruce didn't return the bow. He walked closer, circling Chuck with the assessing eye of a jeweler examining a stone of uncertain quality. Chuck stood still, patient, hands at his sides. Up close, Bruce could see the scars on Chuck's knuckles, the slight asymmetry of a nose broken and healed, the weathered texture of someone who'd spent real time in real training, not Hollywood training. But Bruce also saw the cheap GI, the worn shoes by the door, the humility that seemed almost theatrical in its completeness. And something in Bruce, something he didn't recognize as arrogance because it felt like honesty, sparked into judgment. You want to learn from me? Bruce said. It wasn't a question. He glanced at his students, saw them watching, felt the weight of his reputation in the room. Tell me what makes you think you're ready for what I teach. This isn't tournament point sparring. This isn't kata demonstrations. This is Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. It requires not just skill but understanding. Not just practice but transformation. Chuck nodded slowly. I understand that, Mr. Lee. That's exactly why I'm here. I've won tournaments, but I know there's more to martial arts than winning. I've been searching for. Bruce interrupted with a laugh. Not cruel exactly, but dismissive, the sound of someone who'd heard this speech before from 1,000 wannabes and weekend warriors. You've been searching. He repeated the words with a mockery so subtle it took a moment to land. Everyone is searching. But searching isn't finding. And learning from me isn't about showing up with good intentions. The students shifted uncomfortably. They'd never heard Bruce talk to anyone like this. Usually he was encouraging, philosophical, generous with his knowledge. But something about Chuck had triggered something different, something harder. Chuck's expression didn't change. I'm not claiming to know what I don't know, Mr. Lee. That's why I'm here. To learn what I haven't learned. From tournaments, Bruce said, his smile now edged with something sharper. He walked to a heavy bag, struck it with a punch that barely seemed to travel 6 inches but sent the bag swinging violently. You fight for points. For judges. For trophies on shelves. That's not martial arts. That's competition. It's sport. It's ego dressed up as discipline. The words hung in the air like smoke. Chuck absorbed them without flinching, but something flickered behind his eyes, not anger but something more complex. Recognition maybe. Or disappointment. I'd still like to train here, Chuck said quietly. If you'll have me. Bruce studied him for a long moment. The truth was he didn't need Chuck's money. The studio was doing fine. And he didn't need another student, especially one who carried this particular quality of earnest determination that felt, to Bruce in that moment, like naivety wrapped in calluses. I'll tell you what, Bruce said, his voice carrying to every corner of the dojo. Show me what you've learned from all those tournaments. Spar with me. If you can land one clean technique, I'll consider taking you on. But if I'm not impressed, you walk out and find another teacher. Deal? Chuck hesitated. This wasn't why he'd come. He hadn't come to prove himself through combat. He'd come to learn through humility. But the challenge hung between them now, public and impossible to refuse without losing face. And Chuck understood enough about martial arts culture to know that sometimes, the only way forward was through. All right, Chuck said. But I want to be clear, I'm not here to fight you, Mr. Lee. I'm here to learn from you. Bruce's smile widened. Then consider this your first lesson. They bowed to each other in the center of the mat, though Bruce's bow was perfunctory, almost insulting in its brevity. Chuck's was deep and genuine, the bow of a student to a master, even though the master had just made a mockery of that very relationship. The other students formed a loose circle, uncertain whether to feel excited or uncomfortable. This wasn't how Bruce usually taught. This wasn't how a real teacher welcomed a potential student. Begin when you're ready, Bruce said, settling into his stance. It was cat-like, weight on the back leg, hands loose and alive, fingers extended like blades. His eyes never left Chuck's center mass, reading intention before action, movement before motion. Chuck took his own stance, more squared, more traditional. Karate roots showing through despite years of cross-training. He moved forward carefully, testing distance with a few probing jabs that Bruce slipped with minimal movement, his head swaying just enough to let the punches pass through empty air. Too slow, Bruce said, not unkindly but not encouragingly either. You're thinking about the technique before you throw it? By the time your brain tells your arm to punch, I've already moved. Chuck adjusted, through a combination, jab, cross, low kick, faster this time, more committed. Bruce checked the kick with his shin, parried the punches with forearms that felt like iron wrapped in silk. Before Chuck could reset, Bruce's back fist flickered out, stopping a millimeter from Chuck's nose. Dead, Bruce said simply. Chuck stepped back, nodded, tried again. This time he feinted high and came in with a body punch, something he'd used successfully in tournaments, something that usually worked. Bruce saw it coming before Chuck even committed, sidestepped and replied with a straight blast. 3 rapid punches to the sternum that would have dropped Chuck if Bruce hadn't pulled them at the last instant. The impact still sent Chuck stumbling backward, breath knocked loose, reality adjusted. Too predictable, Bruce said. You're fighting like you're in a point tournament. Set up, execute, retreat, reset. That's not fighting. That's chess with your body. Real fighting is chaos harnessed. It's water finding the crack in the dam. Chuck's breathing had quickened. Not from exhaustion yet, but from the dawning realization that he was completely outmatched. Every technique he threw, Bruce had an answer for. Every strategy he attempted, Bruce had already seen and countered. It was like fighting a mirror that reflected your intentions before you had them. But Chuck didn't quit. That wasn't in his nature. He came forward again, this time abandoning technique for commitment, throwing a spinning back kick that had power and surprise behind it. It was a good kick, tournament-winning speed and technique. Bruce caught it. Simply caught it, one hand on Chuck's ankle, stopping all that momentum cold. For a moment they were frozen there. Chuck on one leg, off balance, completely vulnerable. Bruce holding his ankle with one hand, his expression unreadable. Then Bruce swept Chuck's standing leg. Chuck went down hard, the impact of mat against back driving the air from his lungs. Bruce didn't follow him to the ground. He simply stood over him, not menacing but not helping either, looking down with an expression that combined pity and vindication. "This is what I mean," Bruce said, his voice carrying to the watching students who stood riveted, uncertain whether to be inspired or horrified. "You have techniques. You have conditioning. You have tournament experience. But you don't have understanding. You fight with your body. I fight with everything. My mind sees your intention. My spirit reads your fear. My water flows into your gaps and becomes ice, becomes stone, becomes whatever it needs to be." Chuck lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, tasting the copper of exertion in his mouth, feeling the ache of impact spreading through his back. He'd been in thousands of sparring matches, had fought the best tournament fighters in the country, had broken boards and bricks and the confidence of opponents who thought they were unbeatable. But Bruce Lee had just dismantled him like a child. Chuck got to his feet slowly. Bruce watched him rise, and for a moment, something flickered across Bruce's face. Respect for resilience, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow practitioner's toughness. But it passed quickly, replaced by that same assessing distance. "Thank you for the lesson, Mr. Lee," Chuck said, bowing again. His voice was steady despite the lingering breathlessness. "You're right. I have a lot to learn." Bruce's expression shifted then, and not in the way Chuck might have hoped. The assessment became dismissal. "You do. But I'm not sure I'm the right teacher for you. You're too set in your ways. Too much tournament thinking. It would take years to unlearn what you've learned, and I don't have years to give to someone who might not have the capacity to understand what I'm teaching." The words landed like physical blows. Chuck stood very still, processing them, and the students around the mat exchanged glances, some sympathetic, some relieved it wasn't them being dismissed. "I understand," Chuck said quietly. He bowed a third time, deeper than before, then turned and walked toward the door where his shoes waited. He didn't argue. Didn't plead. Didn't let anger or humiliation show on his face. He simply accepted the rejection with the same quiet dignity he'd entered with. Bruce watched him go, and somewhere in his chest something tightened, not regret exactly but something adjacent to it. He pushed it away. He'd done the right thing. The honest thing. Teaching was too important to waste on someone who wasn't ready, who might never be ready. Better to be direct than to string someone along with false hope. 3 months passed. Bruce's life continued its upward trajectory. Enter the Dragon filming began. His philosophy spread further into mainstream consciousness. Magazine interviews, television appearances, the growing sense that he was becoming more than a martial artist. He was becoming a cultural bridge, a philosopher warrior for a new generation seeking meaning beyond materialism. But Chucknorris's name kept appearing. At first, Bruce barely noticed. A mention in Black Belt magazine about Chuck winning another tournament. A small article about his teaching at his own dojo in Sherman Oaks. A photograph of Chuck demonstrating technique at a seminar, his face serious and focused. Students gathered around him with that same reverence Bruce's students showed him. Then Bruce heard through the grapevine that Chuck was saying interesting things. Not bitter things. Not angry things. But interesting things. Someone asked Chuck about training with Bruce Lee, apparently. And Chuck had said, with that same quiet dignity, "Mr. Lee is incredibly skilled. Watching him move is like watching philosophy become physical. I learned something important from him, even if it wasn't the lesson I expected." No criticism. No anger. Just acknowledgement and a strange, ambiguous praise that left more questions than answers. Bruce heard this and felt something complicated twist in his stomach. He told himself it didn't matter. Chuck was entitled to his perspective. But the fact that Chuck wasn't bad-mouthing him, wasn't playing the victim, somehow made Bruce more uncomfortable than if Chuck had gone around Hollywood complaining about his treatment. Then came a charity demonstration organized by mutual friends. Multiple styles, multiple masters, raising money for youth martial arts programs. Bruce was invited as the featured demonstrator. Chuck was invited too. Bruce couldn't object without contradicting his own philosophy about unity in martial arts. about looking beyond style to find truth. The night arrived. Bruce performed brilliantly, 15 minutes of virtuosity that left the audience breathless. 2-finger push-ups, 1-inch punches, speed work that made his hands blur, all while weaving philosophy into demonstration. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, and Bruce felt that familiar validation, that necessary oxygen of recognition. Then Chuck took the stage. His demonstration was different in every way. Where Bruce had been water and lightning, Chuck was earth and iron. Powerful, direct, traditional but evolving. He broke 6 stacked boards with a single strike. He demonstrated Q-mic combinations showing not just attacks but control, precision, respect between practitioners. But what struck people wasn't the power or skill. It was the humility in every movement. Chuck demonstrated like a man who had nothing to prove and everything to share. He explained techniques not as superior but as one path among many. He bowed to his partners with genuine respect. He smiled when techniques worked perfectly, not with pride but with simple joy. The audience loved him. Not the way they loved Bruce. Not with or reserved for legends, but with warmth, with accessibility. Bruce had shown mastery. Chuck had shown humanity. Bruce watched from backstage, feeling something unfamiliar coil in his chest. The audience loved Chuck. And Bruce suddenly realized his own demonstration had lacked something Chuck's possessed: connection. Bruce had challenged his audience. Chuck had welcomed them. That night, alone in his home gym, Bruce trained harder than necessary, as if physical exhaustion could silence uncomfortable questions. But in the dark, hitting the bag with combinations that would have knocked out any opponent, his mind traveled backward through time and space, back to Hong Kong, back to when he was the one seeking teaching, seeking acceptance. He remembered Yip Man, his Wing Chun teacher, an old man with hands like paper and eyes like steel. Bruce had come to him arrogant with youth and natural talent, expecting immediate acceptance into the inner circle. Yip Man had watched with that same assessing gaze Bruce had later used on Chuck. And then Yip Man had said something Bruce never forgot. "You have fire, young Bruce. But fire without control is not a tool. It's a disaster waiting to happen. Come back when you've learned to carry water as carefully as you carry that fire." Bruce had been furious. Humiliated. He'd walked out feeling rejected and misunderstood, certain Yip Man was too old, too traditional to recognize real talent. But he'd gone back. Eventually. After anger cooled and pride was tempered by the realization that every other teacher told him the same thing. Talented but undisciplined, skilled but unwise, powerful but unready. Yip Man had eventually accepted him. And over years of training, Bruce learned what the old master meant. Martial arts wasn't just about fighting. It was about character. About becoming someone worthy of the power you wielded. About understanding that the fist that could destroy could also protect, and the practitioner had to develop wisdom to know which was called for. Standing in his gym, sweat soaking through his shirt, Bruce stopped hitting the bag. The memory of Yip Man's weathered face floated in his mind's eye, seeing through Bruce's arrogance to the potential beneath. Had Chuck looked at him the way Bruce once looked at Yip Man? Had Bruce become the thing he'd once resented? The gatekeeper who judged too quickly, who saw the surface and assumed it was the whole? The realization hit Bruce like a body blow. He sat down on the gym floor, breathing hard, not from exertion but from sudden recognition of his own behavior seen clearly for the first time. He hadn't turned Chuck away because Chuck wasn't ready. He'd turned Chuck away because some part of Bruce, some small, insecure part he didn't like to acknowledge, had felt threatened by Chuck's quiet confidence, by his humility that didn't require external validation, by his willingness to bow deeply even after being dismissed. He'd been wrong. Not just about Chuck's readiness, but about his own readiness to be the teacher he claimed to be. Real teachers didn't just impart technique. They recognized genuine seeking when they saw it. They nurtured humility rather than punishing it. They understood that readiness wasn't about having all the answers but about being willing to ask the right questions. Bruce sat there for a long time, letting the realization settle into his bones the way training settles into muscle memory, deep enough to change not just what you know but what you are. Eventually he stood. Bowed to the empty gym, to the ghosts of teachers past, to Yip Man's memory, to the younger version of himself who'd been given grace when he deserved dismissal. And he decided to find Chucknorris. Bruce drove to Sherman Oaks the next afternoon, to Chuck's dojo. It was smaller than his place in a less glamorous part of town, the sign outside simple: Norris Karate Studio. Through the window, Bruce could see a class in progress, children learning basic techniques, Chuck demonstrating with infinite patience, correcting stances gently, encouraging effort over perfection. Bruce watched for a moment before entering. Watched Chuck interact with those kids with the same respect he'd shown Bruce at that first meeting. No talking down, no impatience, just genuine attention to each small person trying to learn something difficult and new. The class ended. Parents arrived to collect children. Chuck bowed to each student as they left, and they bowed back with varying degrees of coordination and seriousness. Then the dojo was empty except for Chuck, who began straightening equipment, sweeping the mat with methodical care. Bruce entered. Chuck looked up from his sweeping, surprise crossing his face, then quickly replaced by that same neutral courtesy. He leaned the broom against the wall and bowed. "Mr. Lee, this is unexpected." Bruce returned the bow, deeper than he had before, deep enough to mean something. "Chuck, I came to talk to you if you have time." "Of course. Can I offer you water?" "Water would be good." They sat in Chuck's small office, really just a converted storage room with a desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered with certificates from tournaments and teaching qualifications. Chuck poured water from a cooler into paper cups, handed one to Bruce and waited. Bruce had rehearsed what he wanted to say during the drive over, but now, sitting across from Chuck, the prepared words felt inadequate. So he abandoned the script and spoke from the place he'd found the night before in his gym. "I was wrong," Bruce said. "About you. About how I treated you when you came to my dojo. I dismissed you without really seeing you, and that was not who I want to be as a teacher." Chuck listened without interrupting, his face thoughtful but not triumphant. "I told myself you weren't ready," Bruce continued. "That tournament fighting had made you too rigid to learn what I taught. But the truth is, you came with exactly the quality a student should have: humility and genuine desire to learn. And I punished you for it because it reminded me of something I didn't want to see about myself." "What did it remind you of?" Chuck asked quietly. "That mastery and wisdom aren't the same thing. That being the best fighter doesn't automatically make you the best teacher. That there's a difference between strength that needs to be displayed and strength that's secure enough to be quiet." Chuck nodded slowly. "Mr. Lee, I appreciate you saying this. I won't lie, what happened at your dojo stung. Not the sparring, I expected to be outmatched. But the dismissal, the feeling that I wasn't even worth the attempt to teach, that hurt. I spent a lot of time afterward questioning whether I should keep training, keep teaching, or whether I was fooling myself about having anything valuable to offer." "But you kept going," Bruce said. "I did. Because I realized something important. Your rejection taught me something you didn't intend to teach. That external validation, even from someone I deeply respected, couldn't be the foundation of my practice. I had to find my own reasons, my own path, my own truth. In a strange way, you gave me a gift even if it didn't feel like one at the time." Bruce absorbed this, feeling the complexity of it. His cruelty had inadvertently pushed Chuck toward something valuable, but that didn't excuse the cruelty. Good outcomes didn't retroactively justify bad actions. "I'd like to make it right," Bruce said. "I'd like to invite you to train with me, really train, not as a test but as colleagues learning from each other. I know, I could learn from you as much as you could learn from me." Chuck smiled then, not with smugness but with genuine warmth. "I'd like that, Mr. Lee. I'd like that very much. Call me Bruce. Then call me Chuck." They shook hands and in that moment something shifted. Bruce felt lighter than he had in months, as if apologizing had released pressure he hadn't realized he was carrying. Over the following weeks they trained together regularly. Sometimes at Bruce's dojo, sometimes at Chuck's, sometimes in parks. They sparred without ego attached to outcome. They demonstrated techniques and debated philosophy. They challenged each other's assumptions while respecting each other's experience. Bruce learned from Chuck's traditional foundation, the discipline of kata as meditative practice that built muscle memory and mental focus. Chuck learned from Bruce's fluidity, how water principles could unlock movements he'd thought impossible. But more than techniques, they learned about teaching. Bruce watched how Chuck interacted with students, patient where Bruce was demanding, encouraging where Bruce was critical. And Bruce realized his approach, while it produced skilled fighters, sometimes broke spirits. Chuck's approach, while perhaps slower to create champions, built confident practitioners who loved martial arts rather than feared disappointing their teacher. "You create warriors," Chuck said one afternoon. "I create practitioners. Neither is wrong, but they serve different purposes." "Can they coexist?" Bruce asked. "The warrior and the practitioner? Maybe. Maybe that's what we're figuring out together." Their friendship deepened. They discussed movies and philosophy, family and ambition, the strange experience of being martial artists in Hollywood where authenticity constantly battled commercialism. Bruce opened up about his struggles with Hollywood racism. Chuck shared his own insecurities about whether his simpler approach had value. "You have something I don't," Bruce admitted one evening. When you teach, people feel accepted. When I teach, people feel challenged. Both have value, but yours creates loyalty in a way mine doesn't. My students respect me. Yours love you. Chuck considered this. I think they can respect and love the same teacher. You're learning that balance. I've seen how you've adjusted your teaching lately, more patience, more encouragement. Your students notice. Bruce smiled. Learning from the master. We're learning from each other. That's the point, isn't it? No one has all the answers. The moment we think we do, we stop growing. Then the phone rang. It was the director from Enter the Dragon, wanting to discuss fight choreography. When Bruce returned, his expression was thoughtful, almost mischievous. They want to add a Colosseum fight scene, Bruce said. A big climactic battle. They're asking if I know any martial artists who could match me on screen. I recommended you. They want to meet with you about playing the opponent. It's a small role but pivotal. Interested? Chuck stared at him, processing. This was Bruce offering him opportunity, offering exposure, offering legitimacy in an industry that rarely gave chances to martial artists who weren't Bruce Lee. Why? Chuck asked. Why me? Bruce smiled, genuine and without edge. Because you're good enough to make me look good, which is rarer than you'd think. You have the skill to match me and the humility to make it collaborative rather than competitive. Plus I owe you. This seems like a good way to start repaying that debt. You don't owe me anything, Chuck said. But his eyes showed his excitement. I do. And more importantly, this is the right choice for the film. So what do you say? Want to fight Bruce Lee in front of millions of people? Chuck laughed, that quiet, genuine laugh from deep in his chest. Yeah, I think I do. The Colosseum fight scene in Enter the Dragon became legendary. Everyone on set felt the energy between Bruce and Chuck. The mutual respect, the collaborative creativity, the way they pushed each other while keeping the scene's narrative intact. They rehearsed for weeks, designing each exchange to tell a story, two masters meeting in combat, respecting each other's abilities, testing limits. Bruce incorporated techniques learned from Chuck. Chuck used concepts Bruce had taught him. The result was a fight scene that felt alive, real, dangerous in a way pure choreography rarely achieved. When filming wrapped on their scene, Bruce and Chuck bowed to each other in front of cast and crew, a deep bow of mutual respect that everyone understood was about more than just the movie. It was about a journey they'd taken together, from that first disastrous meeting to this moment of collaboration and friendship. You made me better, Bruce said. In this scene and in general. Thank you for being patient with me while I figured that out. You made me better too, Chuck replied. Pushed me past where I thought my limits were. We're good for each other, Bruce. The film released to massive success, and Chuck's fight scene became one of the most talked about sequences. His career launched from that exposure. Bruce's star continued upward. But more than professional success, they built something rarer. Genuine friendship founded on mutual respect, humility, and willingness to grow. One afternoon, almost a year after their first meeting, they sat together after an intense training session. Both were exhausted, satisfied, wrung out in the way only deep practice creates. I've been thinking about that first day I came here, Chuck said. You asked me why I thought I was ready to learn from you. If you asked that same question now, knowing what I know, I'd say I wasn't ready then, and I'm probably not ready now, and I'll never be ready in the sense of being complete. But readiness isn't about being perfect before you start. It's about being willing to be imperfect while you learn. You taught me that even though you didn't mean to. Bruce absorbed this, feeling the truth settle into understanding. You know what I've learned? That the master title is dangerous. It implies you've arrived, that you've learned everything. Every day I discover how much I don't know. And that's not discouraging anymore. It's liberating. Be water, Chuck said with a slight smile. Be water, Bruce agreed. But also be earth sometimes. Be fire when needed. Be all of it, none of it, everything in between. That's what martial arts really teaches if we're paying attention. Not how to fight but how to be. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who've moved past needing to fill every moment with words. Later, when Chuck was leaving, he paused at the door. Bruce? Thank you. For the apology, for the opportunity, for the friendship. Yes, I had to, Bruce said. Because the moment I realized I was wrong, I had a choice. Protect my ego or serve something larger than my ego. And I'm finally learning that the second option is always the right one, even when it's harder. Chuck bowed. Bruce bowed back, deeper this time with more meaning. As Chuck left, Bruce stood in his dojo alone, feeling more at peace than he had in years. He thought about Yip Man who had given him grace to grow. About his wife Linda who had asked the right question at the right time. About Chuck, who had responded to rejection with quiet dignity that spoke louder than any protest. Bruce walked to the center of the mat and began to move through forms, slowly at first, then faster, then so fast his movements blurred into continuous flow. But this time he wasn't training to be better than anyone else. He was training to be better than who he'd been yesterday. Training to live up to the philosophy he taught. Training to be worthy of the students who trusted him, the friend who'd forgiven him, the legacy he was building not just through films but through every interaction, every choice, every moment of choosing growth over ego. Years later, after Bruce's tragic and early death, Chuck would be interviewed about their friendship. Asked about that first meeting, Chuck would pause before answering. "Bruce Lee taught me two things," Chuck would say. "First, he showed me how high the ceiling of martial arts could be. His skill was transcendent, and watching him move was like watching art and physics collaborate. But second, and maybe more importantly, he taught me that even masters make mistakes. Even legends are human. And the measure of a person isn't whether they're perfect. It's whether they're willing to acknowledge their imperfections and grow from them. Bruce did that. He showed me that strength isn't just about never being wrong. It's about having the courage to admit when you are and do something about it." Chuck would smile then. A lot of people remember Bruce as this untouchable figure. And his skill was untouchable. But the man was beautifully human, struggling with the same ego and insecurity we all face. The difference was, when he recognized those things in himself, he didn't hide from them. He faced them directly, honestly, with the intention of overcoming. Because this story isn't really about Bruce Lee or Chuck Norris, not entirely. It's about every moment we choose pride over growth, ego over connection, being right over being kind. It's about every time we laugh when we should listen, dismiss when we should investigate, protect our image when we should expose our vulnerability. The lesson of that first laugh, the moment Bruce saw Chuck and chose mockery over curiosity, echoes through every interaction where we judge too quickly, where we let insecurities dictate our actions, where we forget that the person in front of us might be offering something we need even if we don't recognize it yet. But the story doesn't end with that laugh. It continues through Bruce's recognition of his mistake, his decision to apologize, his choice to make things right even when it cost him pride. We all get things wrong. We all let ego drive decisions we later regret. We all have moments where we're Bruce Lee laughing dismissively at someone who came seeking genuine connection. The question isn't whether we'll have those moments. We will. The question is what we do afterward. Bruce chose growth. And in doing so, he showed that true mastery isn't about being invincible. It's about being vulnerable enough to admit mistakes and strong enough to correct them. It's about understanding that the people we dismiss might be the very people we need most. That strength needing constant display is actually weakness, while strength that can be quiet, that can bow deeply, that can apologize sincerely, is the truest power of all. Chuck taught Bruce this by being exactly who he was. Humble, persistent, dignified in the face of dismissal, generous with forgiveness when offered. He didn't demand apology or recognition. He simply continued being the best version of himself. And that quiet consistency, that refusal to let someone else's judgment define his worth, was its own form of mastery. So when you face your own version of that dojo moment, when you're tempted to laugh at someone who seems beneath you, to dismiss someone who doesn't fit your expectations, to protect your ego at the expense of connection, remember this story. Remember that being right in the moment might cost you something valuable in the long term. Remember that the strongest position isn't standing over someone you've defeated, but standing beside someone you've learned from. And if you've already had your laugh, if you've already made the mistake, remember that the story doesn't have to end there. You can be Bruce Lee in the second half of this tale, the person who recognizes error, who has courage to apologize, who transforms potential enemy into actual friend through the simple act of choosing growth over pride. Because in the end, we're all students forever, learning from each other, growing through mistakes, becoming more through the humility of admitting we're less than we pretended to be. Bruce Lee laughed at Chuck Norris. And the smile didn't last long, not because Chuck made him pay through violence, but because Bruce's own conscience, his own growing wisdom, his own commitment to being more than his ego, wouldn't let him rest until he made it right. That's the real victory. Be like water, Bruce said. But also be like Chuck. Steady, patient, willing to wait while the person who wronged you finds their way to rightness. Sometimes the greatest strength is giving others space to grow into the people they're capable of becoming. Sometimes the smile that doesn't last is the one that teaches us everything we need to know.